The release of Metroid Dread has once again surfaced one of my favorite evergreen talking points when it comes to gaming. I mean, my other favorite evergreen talking point when it comes to gaming. There we go. Complaining about graphics is nothing new when it comes to gamers wasting their time on Twitter. Just last year in 2020, in the midst of a global pandemic, we decided that it was absolutely an appropriate time to make a case that not only was Nintendo's current big release then, Animal Crossing New Horizon, showcasing graphics unworthy of its $60 price, but that the superior visuals of The Last of Us Part 2 was not only a prerequisite of a full-priced release, but justification for crunching developers. Keep it classy, video gamers. Regardless, I can't exactly blame people for feeling this way about graphics, even if I find the opinion itself ridiculous. After all, the entire gaming industry is marketed almost exclusively on bigger and better graphics. Every new console generation touts higher resolutions, faster frame rates, bigger poly counts, and higher texture resolutions as the main reason to upgrade. From the outside looking in, you'd think the main point of a video game would be looking at it, rather than playing it. But even if we put aside the entire argument that the point of a video game is to be fun to play, not pretty to look at, and that all the games chasing visual fidelity will eventually age into aesthetic impotence, and even if we ignore the fact that many of the people who tout the importance of fantastic graphics will then turn around and cite Ocarina of Time, Demon's Souls, and Chrono Trigger as some of their favorite games of all time, the fact of the matter is that the idea that more photorealistic graphics equals more effort and thus deserves a higher price tag isn't even necessarily completely true in the first place. This idea kinda goes against common sense. Obviously, if a game looks better, it's harder to make, right? But as someone who has made a couple video games myself, and routinely makes and studies 3D art, I feel like I can clear up some common misconceptions on how the general pipeline of making 3D art actually works, and show that most photorealistic games actually implement a lot of shortcuts that a stylized game like Animal Crossing or Metroid Dread can't fall back on. Photorealism is an entire subsection of 3D modeling. Commonly referred to as PBR, or physically based rendering, realism in 3D focuses on creating materials that react realistically to light, as light interacting with surfaces is the entire basis for how our eyes gather information and, by extension, how we perceive the visual world. So the more realistic we can make the interaction between the virtual lights illuminating our game worlds and the virtual materials that make them up, the more realistic the game will look, since these elements are interfacing with each other much more like their real-world counterparts. Because there is an entire standard for photorealism in PBR, it means that video games trying to work in this style have the benefit of all aiming for the same visual target. Since the style is so widespread and a visual goal everyone can understand, it's profitable for companies to make pre-made assets for photorealism, ready to be used in any project that might need them. One only has to poke through the Unity or Unreal Asset Store to see dozens of packs of PBR tree generators and terrain assets that you can easily drop into a project, ready-made to jumpstart your open-world PBR masterpiece. Now, obviously I'm not saying that Sony Santa Monica or Naughty Dog are making Unity asset flips. I'm using these more consumer-facing options to demonstrate how the PBR industry is just that, an industry, with lots of tools available to streamline the monumental task that is recreating the real world in the most painstaking amount of detail technology currently allows. No one at Sony is manually modeling every single leaf on every single tree in God of War or The Last of Us. There are tools they use that allow them to easily generate these things and distribute them across a massive landscape. Even the free version of Unity has a fantastic built-in terrain system that lets you make miles of mountains and distribute grass and foliage through it in minutes. If you ever wonder why so many open world games take place in large open natural biomes, now you know. They're extremely efficient to generate using tools like this. On the other hand, if you're making a game with a more unique, stylized look, like an Animal Crossing or Metroid Dread, whether due to hardware constraints from running on the Switch or a purely aesthetic choice, you can't rely on tapping into this ecosystem of PBR tools to offload asset generation for your game, because now you're creating assets in a style that only your game has. Metroid Dread's levels can't leverage a terrain system because it's locked to a 2D plane and inherits the grid system from the previous 2D titles, so the entire map has to be built manually. Making stylized cartoony trees in Animal Crossing might have less detail overall, but you're going to have to create each style of tree in the game by hand, or at least handcraft an in-house template that can be customized for all the styles the game needs. This isn't to say that stylized games don't utilize shortcuts. Every game does. You can find tons of stylized asset packs as well, but obviously that style may not work with the aesthetic of the game you're trying to make. Both Metroid Dread and Animal Crossing are stylized games, but dropping Samus into your Animal Crossing town would look just as out of place as dropping in Kratos. The amount of work to create even a simple game is staggering. On that you can trust me. But in an industry as profitable as video games, with such a strong penchant for using PBR visuals to benchmark new hardware, creating tools to expedite this process only makes sense. Just realize that there's a lot more to working on a video game than just creating the highest fidelity visuals possible, and that a lot of these visuals are some of the simplest parts of the process to implement. And if you want an even deeper dive into the whole realism versus stylized debate, check out this video talking about why devs could benefit long-term by focusing on art direction instead of high poly counts.